Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks. The last place I ever expected to encounter something unexplainable was a tiny, rundown corner store. You know the kind of place that smells faintly of bleach and stale candy, wedged between a laundromat with flickering neon signs and a pawn shop that probably hadn't seen a customer in weeks. It was Christmas Eve, and instead of relaxing at home like a normal teenager, I was stuck on a late-night grocery run with my mom. To set the scene, I was 16, moody, and already counting down the minutes until I could plop on the couch with my little brother and binge-watch cheesy holiday specials. Mom had just finished a grueling shift at the diner, and apparently this grocery trip was urgent. Two things I was pretty sure no one actually needed on Christmas Eve. The store was exactly what you'd expect. Harsh fluorescent lights humming like an old radiator, aisles in a state of mild chaos, and a few shoppers who looked just as exhausted as my mom. The linoleum floor was scuffed and shiny in patches, and the whole place had a weird clinical vibe that made you want to get in and get out as fast as possible. I followed Mom through the aisles, dragging my feet and half tuned out thanks to my earbuds. She was focused on her crumpled shopping list, muttering to herself about prices, while I grabbed a wire basket and trudged along behind her. That's when I noticed him. He was by the canned goods aisle, standing so still I almost thought he was a mannequin at first. An old man leaning slightly on the handle of an empty shopping cart. His clothes hung off him, an oversized brown sweater with frayed cuffs and slacks that looked like they belonged to someone twice his size. He had this blank expression, like he wasn't really there, just staring not at the shelves but at nothing in particular. I didn't think much of it at first. Big city, weird people. It was practically a rule. I figured he was one of those harmless types who wander grocery stores just to kill time or escape the cold. But then I saw him again, this time by the bread aisle. Then again, lingering near the dairy section. Each time he wasn't doing anything. No shopping, no browsing, just standing there watching. At this point I started feeling that little prickle at the back of my neck. You know, the one where your body tells you something's off, even if your brain isn't sure what it is yet. I shook it off, convincing myself I was overreacting. It's Christmas Eve, I thought. Maybe he's just lonely. But then it started feeling deliberate. By the time we reached the candy aisle, I was sure he was following us. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, there he was. Same empty cart, same hollow stare. I nudged my mom as she compared prices on peppermint bark. "Hey, don't look, but I think that guy's following us," I whispered. Mom glanced up briefly, barely giving him a second look before going back to her list. "People just shop weird. Don't make it a thing," she said. But it was a thing. I could feel his gaze every time we turned a corner, like a spotlight on the back of my neck. I stopped in the middle of an aisle, pretending to tie my shoe, just to see what he'd do. Sure enough, he shuffled past me, his cart squeaking softly as he moved. That's when I caught his smell. Sharp and strange, like mothballs and something metallic, like pennies left out in the rain. By the time we got to the checkout line, I felt like I could finally breathe again. We were almost done. He was still there though, lingering by the self-checkout machines, partially hidden behind a towering display of gingerbread house kits. He wasn't even pretending to shop anymore, just standing there, his empty cart beside him. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few other cars scattered around. Mom handed me a bag of groceries to load into the trunk while she went to unlock the car. That's when I heard it. A low, gravelly voice, rough like sandpaper rubbed against wood. "Don't forget to leave the back door open." I whipped around, and there he was. He was standing so close I could see every deep crack and wrinkle on his face, like the surface of dried-out clay. His eyes were sunken and glassy, like he was looking straight through me. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Before I could even process what was happening, he turned and shuffled off, disappearing into the dark edges of the parking lot. On the drive home, I told Mom everything. Every detail, from the staring to the smell to what he said. She didn't say much, just gripped the steering wheel tighter and double-checked the locks when we got home. Normally, she would have brushed it off or told me to stop scaring myself. But this time she didn't, and that scared me more than anything. The rest of the night felt off. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt heavy, like the whole place was holding its breath. We went through the motions, wrapping presents, setting out cookies for Santa, but it didn't feel right. My little brother fell asleep on the couch around 9, curled up under a fuzzy blanket. Mom and I stayed up, pretending to watch some old Christmas special neither of us cared about. And then at exactly 9:17 it started. 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate. They echoed through the apartment, louder than they had any right to be. Mom and I froze, staring at each other. Then 3 more knocks. This time from the back door. Mom grabbed the kitchen knife without a word, her face pale but determined. "Stay here," she whispered. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. As I fumbled with the phone, the lights flickered, casting the room into brief, stuttering darkness. The fridge hummed, then went silent, and then came the music. A warped, distorted version of Silent Night, like it was playing from a broken, wind-up music box. The air turned icy, so cold I could see my breath hanging in front of me. The pounding started again, louder this time, rattling the walls. The doorknobs twisted violently, first one, then the other, as if someone or something was trying to force their way inside. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Everything went silent. When the police arrived, there was nothing to find. No footprints in the snow outside. No signs of forced entry. But there was one thing, a neatly folded brown sweater sitting on the back porch. I knew it hadn't been there before. Every Christmas Eve since, it's the same. At exactly 9:17, the knocks start. The air grows cold, the lights flicker, and that eerie music fills the air. We've moved 3 times, but it doesn't matter. It always finds us. Every year, another sweater appears, colder than the last. I don't know what he wants. I don't think I ever will. But I've learned one thing. The back door stays locked. Always. The first time I met Violet, it was during one of those classic college holiday fairs that make you feel like the world is glowing. The quad was alive with twinkling lights strung between the trees. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider. You could hear the faint hum of carolers singing in the distance. It was chilly, the kind of cold that bites your nose but doesn't drive you indoors. I was standing by a mulled wine stall, debating whether the tiny cup of overpriced warm wine was worth it when I felt a presence beside me. I turned, and there she was. She was bundled in a pale scarf that looked almost white in the dim glow of the lights, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. There wasn't anything striking about her appearance, but there was this air about her, like she'd stepped out of the background of an old memory you couldn't quite place. Familiar, but not. She smiled at me, a small, unassuming smile, and then said, with this surprising directness, "Want to grab lunch sometime?" I remember blinking, caught completely off guard. I wasn't exactly someone strangers approach with invitations like this, especially not out of the blue. But it was Christmas, and her timing made it feel harmless, maybe even a little charming. I said yes, mostly out of politeness, and because I didn't want to be the kind of person who turned down random acts of friendliness. At that moment, I thought it was just lunch. Just one lunch. I had no idea it was the start of something I'd carry with me for years to come. We started meeting up regularly after that, mostly for casual lunches on campus. At first it felt easy, like we were just 2 people passing the time. She had a way of filling silences with light conversation, talking about professors, classes, or funny things she'd overheard in the dining hall. But as weeks passed, I noticed something strange. Violet wasn't just meeting me for lunch. She was always there, waiting outside my lectures, coincidentally walking in the same direction as me, or showing up at the library when I was studying. It started to feel less like coincidence and more like she was keeping track of me. The first time I really felt unsettled was during a class right before winter break. I was chatting with a guy named Andre who I'd barely spoken to before, and casually asked if he wanted to swap numbers to study for finals. As I said it, I caught Violet's gaze from a few rows away. She wasn't just looking, she was staring, her eyes locked on me with this intensity that made my stomach twist. I looked away quickly, brushing it off. That evening, I got a friend request from her on Facebook. The strange thing, I'd never told her my last name. She'd spelled it perfectly, though. I told myself she must have found it in some campus directory, but it still gave me this uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. As the holidays got closer, her texts started coming more frequently. At first, they were casual, links to memes, comments on my posts. But soon, they turned into a constant stream of messages. She'd tag me in things without much context, like inside jokes that didn't exist. I told myself she was just overly friendly, but her behavior started to cross lines. One day she made this offhand comment about my girlfriend Paige. Her name's kind of basic, don't you think? For someone like you, she'd said, tilting her head like it was some innocent observation. The way she said it, though, was anything but innocent. It felt like a warning shot, subtle but sharp. Christmas Eve was when everything changed. Most of the students had gone home for the break, but I'd stayed behind to finish a paper. That evening, Violet texted me, asking if I wanted to go for a walk. I'd already turned her down twice that week, but there was something about her tone this time, almost desperate, that made me hesitate. She suggested the chapel gardens, saying the snow and lights made it magical. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The air was freezing when I met her outside the chapel. She was wrapped in this long red coat, her breath curling into clouds as she spoke. She didn't say much at first, just smiled and led me through the garden. The path was lined with evergreens wrapped in dim, flickering fairy lights. The quiet was heavy, so still that every crunch of snow underfoot felt deafening. She stopped suddenly by a cluster of trees and turned to me. "This place feels like a secret," she said, her voice soft, almost dreamy. "Like it's just for us." Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her gloved hand brushing mine. Then, without warning, she leaned in and kissed me. Her lips were ice cold, her movements rushed and urgent. I froze, pulling back instinctively. "Violet," I stammered, my voice barely steady. "I can't do this." For a moment, her face crumpled, and I thought she might cry. But then she smiled, a strange, distant smile that made my skin crawl. "It's okay," she said, her tone eerily calm. "You'll understand one day." I didn't stick around to figure out what she meant. I turned and walked away as quickly as I could, the sound of my boots crunching against the snow echoing in the silence. When I glanced back, she was still there, standing perfectly still, framed by the faint glow of the fairy lights. That image haunted me for days. After that, things escalated. In January, I stumbled across something that turned my unease into outright fear. I was scrolling through Tumblr when I saw a post quoting my personal bio, word for word. The account belonged to Violet. Her entire blog was a bizarre, obsessive shrine dedicated to me. She'd written long, detailed posts romanticizing our lunches, calling them dates. That kiss on Christmas Eve? She'd rewritten it as a mutual confession under the stars. But the most unsettling part was the fictional character she'd created. She called him Ian, and he was a twisted version of me, idealized, perfect, and completely under her control. She'd even used my photos, reposting them as though they belonged to this made-up person. Her followers ate it up, encouraging her obsession like some kind of twisted fandom. When I confronted her about it, she acted completely oblivious. "What blog?" she asked, her expression blank. By the next day, the blog was gone, but her behavior didn't stop. Christmas morning, I found a small gift outside my dorm room. Inside was a snow globe and a note. "To the one I'll always wait for." That was the last straw. I blocked her on every platform, but it didn't stop her. She started spreading rumors about me, flirting with Paige and trying to sabotage my friendships. The scariest part came a year later. I was living off campus by then, trying to move on. One afternoon, a card arrived in the mail. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside, it read, "No one knows you like I do." It's been years now, and I've done everything I can to distance myself. Changed numbers, deleted accounts, even moved cities. But Violet always finds a way back. Every Christmas, I brace myself for the reminder that her obsession isn't something that fades. It lingers like the faint scent of spiced cider, weaving itself into a season that should bring peace but always leaves me feeling haunted. The snow crunched under my boots as I stepped off the curb. My breath formed little clouds in the freezing air. Christmas lights blinked cheerfully from windows and along rooftops. Their colors bounced off the frost-covered cars parked along the street. Normally, I'd love this kind of thing. The festive decorations, the cold biting my nose, the faint scent of pine trees from the little stalls selling last-minute wreaths. But that night, none of it mattered. It felt like all the warmth and cheer of the season was happening in another world, far away from the pit in my stomach. Nick had called me earlier that evening, just as I'd sat down to wrap a few gifts. His voice was a wreck. "Lila, it's bad," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "Really bad. I need you." I tried to get more out of him. What happened, where he was, if he was okay. But all he gave me were cryptic instructions. "Come alone. Bring a flashlight. Meet him at the old warehouse by the train tracks." I should have said no. Every part of me screamed not to go. But Nick wasn't just anyone. He was my oldest friend, the kind of person who could call you after 5 years of silence and still feel like family. So I told him I'd come. Now here I was, standing in front of that crumbling, graffiti-covered building, its jagged silhouette cut against the cold December sky. The warehouse had been abandoned for years. It was the kind of place we used to dare each other to explore when we were kids, back when we thought ghosts were the scariest things in the world. Now, as I stood there staring at the gaping black doorway, I wished I could go back to being scared of things that weren't real. The door creaked open when I pushed it. The sound sliced through the silence like a scream. Inside, it was even colder than outside. The damp, bone-deep chill made my teeth ache. The air smelled stale, like wet concrete and mildew. But underneath it was something else. Something metallic and sharp, like copper. Blood. Nick. My voice echoed in the cavernous space, bouncing off rusted beams and broken machinery. Nothing. Just silence. The kind that felt too loud, like it was listening. I took a shaky step inside. My boots scuffed against the concrete floor. The flashlight beam wobbled in my hands, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Broken crates and tangled wires littered the floor. Every time the light hit something even vaguely human-shaped, my heart jumped into my throat. Nick. I called again, louder this time. My voice cracked on the last syllable. Still no answer. And then I saw it. At first it didn't register. Just a smear on the floor, dark and shiny, like someone had spilled paint. But as I stepped closer, the smell hit me. The unmistakable coppery tang of blood. My heart started pounding, the sound of it roaring in my ears as I followed the trail. Each step felt heavier than the last, like my boots were sinking into the concrete. The trail led to a crumpled figure slumped against the far wall, right under a flickering industrial light. Nick, I ran to him, dropping to my knees so fast it hurt. He looked awful. His face was as pale as the snow outside, his chest rising and falling in short, ragged breaths. Blood soaked his shirt. The dark stain spread across his chest like an ink blot. "Lila," he whispered, his lips barely moving. His eyes fluttered open, just enough to see me. "You came." "Of course I came," I said. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed my hands against the wound. "What the hell happened? Who did this to you?" He winced. His hand weakly grabbed my wrist. "Doesn't matter," he rasped. His voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear him. "You need to leave. They'll come back." "Who's coming back?" My voice cracked, panic rising in my chest. I shook him gently, trying to keep him awake. "Nick, stay with me. We'll get you out of here, okay? Just hang on." But he didn't. His head slumped to the side, and his hand slipped away from mine, falling limp against the cold concrete. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. My hands were still pressed against his chest as if I could will him back to life. Then I heard it. A faint shuffling sound came from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, straining to listen. The flashlight beam darted toward the noise, but all it caught were the same shadows and piles of junk as before. "Hello," I called out. My voice trembled. Silence. And then, a laugh. Low and guttural, it echoed through the space, sending a chill straight down my spine. It wasn't Nick. It wasn't anyone I knew. The laugh grew louder, bouncing off the walls until it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The flashlight flickered. For a split second, I saw them. A figure, tall and hunched, their face hidden behind a mask that glinted in the faint light. In their hand, they held something long and sharp. Even though I couldn't see their eyes, I could feel them watching me. The flashlight went out. I didn't think. I just ran. My boots slipped on the blood-slick floor, my hands scrambling for the walls to guide me as I bolted for the door. Behind me, the laughter turned into heavy, deliberate footsteps, each one louder than the last. My chest burned. My lungs screamed for air, but I didn't dare stop. I hit the door with all my weight, bursting out into the freezing night. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I barely felt it. I just kept running. My footsteps echoed in the empty streets until I reached the main road. The Christmas lights blinked on and off, oblivious. The faint sound of carolers drifted from a nearby cafe, like the world was still spinning normally, like everything hadn't just fallen apart. I collapsed onto a bench. My hands shook so hard I could barely breathe. My palms were still sticky with Nick's blood. The smell of it clung to me. People walked by, their faces blurring together, none of them stopping to ask if I was okay. Nick's body was found the next morning. The police said it was gang violence, another tragic statistic in a part of town no one cared about. They never found the masked figure. I never told them what I saw. Every Christmas since, I think about that night, about Nick, about the laughter that still haunts my dreams. Christmas is supposed to be a time for joy, for family, for hope. But for me, it'll always be the night I learned that some monsters don't hide in the shadows. They walk among us, and sometimes they wear masks. Christmas Eve. It's supposed to be magical, right? The lights, the music, the warmth of family waiting at home. But that night, it felt like anything but. I'd spent the whole day in the city, drowning in a sea of last-minute shoppers, pushing through crowds so thick you couldn't take 2 steps without bumping into someone. My arms ached from carrying more bags than I could count, half filled with gifts for my son, the other half with random groceries I'd forgotten until the very last second. By the time I got off the bus that evening, I was completely spent. All I wanted was to be home, in my cozy little apartment, with my boys snuggled up beside me while we watched a cheesy Christmas movie. That's all. Just one peaceful night. The air hit me the second I stepped down from the bus. That sharp, biting cold almost felt personal, like it was out to get you. My breath billowed in front of me in little clouds as I adjusted my scarf, tugged my coat tighter, and started the walk home. The snow on the ground was more like a dusting than a blanket, but it sparkled under the streetlights, each flake catching the light like glitter. Normally, I'd have appreciated it, taken a moment to let the beauty of it all sink in. But that night, I was too tired to notice much of anything. My focus was on getting home, dropping the bags, and collapsing on the couch. The route to my apartment wasn't long, but it had this little shortcut I always took. It was a narrow lane, squeezed between rows of old brick buildings, and it always felt kind of charming, especially at Christmas. The lights people hung from their windows would sag a little in places, like they'd been put up half-heartedly, but they gave the street this warm, lived-in feeling. When it snowed, it was like stepping into one of those Christmas village displays, the kind people set up with tiny ceramic houses and fake snow. But that night, it didn't feel charming. It felt different. The kind of quiet that makes you notice how loud your own footsteps sound, or how the cold seems to press down harder, sharper. I told myself I was just tired, that I was reading into things too much. Still, I quickened my pace, shifting the bags in my hands and fixing my eyes on the end of the block where the lane opened into the parking lot of my building. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not mine. I'm not the paranoid type, not usually. I'm used to walking home alone even late at night. But something about those footsteps sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I glanced back, trying to make it look casual, like I was just checking the time on my phone or something. There was a man, not far behind me. Tall, broad shoulders, bundled up in a heavy coat with a knit hat pulled low. I couldn't see his face, not clearly anyway, but he was close enough that I could tell he wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't rushing to get home. He was just there. I told myself it was fine. It was Christmas Eve. Plenty of people were out and about, probably on their way home from parties or family gatherings. Maybe he just finished some last-minute shopping too. But then I noticed something. His pace wasn't random. It wasn't just a coincidence. Every time I sped up, so did he. When I slowed down, his steps matched mine. It wasn't accidental. He was following me. By the time I reached the end of the block, my heart was pounding in my chest. My building was right there, so close I could see the soft glow of the lobby lights spilling out onto the snow. I was so focused on getting there that I almost didn't hear him call out, "Merry Christmas." I froze. The words weren't cheerful, not like you'd expect. They were sharp, almost mocking, like he knew something I didn't. I turned slowly, gripping the shopping bags tighter than I realized. He was standing under one of the streetlights now, just far enough away that I could finally make out his face. It wasn't the face of someone you'd want to run into on a dark street. His skin was pale, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His grin, God, that grin. It was wide and wrong, teeth yellowed and jagged like he'd been chewing on glass. But his eyes were the worst. They were cold, empty, like there wasn't a single human thing left behind them. In his hand, glinting under the light, was a jagged piece of metal. It wasn't a proper knife, more like a shard of something broken, but the edge looked sharp enough to do plenty of damage. "Got any Christmas spirit to spare?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he took a step closer. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to stand still. I couldn't run, not with the bags weighing me down, and I knew he'd catch me before I made it to the lobby. I had to think. Fast. You don't want to do this, I said. Walk away now. Just go. For a second, he looked surprised, like he wasn't expecting me to talk back. Then his grin widened and he let out this low, guttural laugh that made my skin crawl. Walk away, he said. Nah, sweetheart. I think we're just getting started. He lunged. It happened so fast that I barely had time to react. My hands let go of the bags instinctively, the weight dropping to the ground with a dull thud. My fingers scrambled for the pocket of my coat, closing around the folding knife I'd started carrying after one too many late-night shifts at work. It wasn't big, but it was sharp. I snapped it open with a flick of my wrist, holding it out in front of me like my life depended on it. To come any closer, I said, and I swear you'll regret it. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he took in the knife. I could see the gears turning in his head, the way he was weighing his options. He hadn't expected this. He thought I'd be an easy target. For a few agonizing seconds, we just stood there, locked in some kind of twisted standoff. Then finally, he took a step back. You're lucky it's Christmas, he muttered, stuffing the shard of metal into his pocket. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the knife. When I finally managed to shove it back into my pocket, I grabbed my bags and stumbled toward the lobby, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I got inside, the warmth of the building hit me like a wave. For the first time, I realized how cold I was. My son came running the moment I opened the door, his little face lighting up with that pure, unfiltered joy only kids seem to have. I dropped the bags and pulled him into the biggest hug I could manage. Mama, you're squishing me, he giggled. Sorry, baby, I whispered. I just missed you. That night, we sat by the Christmas tree, unwrapping gifts and watching the lights twinkle. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that man, his grin, his eyes, the way his voice cut through the air like a blade. I don't think I'll ever forget it. I still carry that knife with me every day. Not because I want to, but because now I know you never think something like that will happen to you. Until it does. Let me tell you, I'll never hear Merry Christmas the same way again. The hum of the engine rumbled beneath me, steady and low, the kind of sound that settled in your bones if you let it. I sat there at the edge of town, my hands wrapped tight around the steering wheel. The cracked leather was familiar under my palms. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening snow. But the streets were still dry and deserted. It was Christmas Eve, a night meant for warmth, joy, family. But for me, it was none of those things. My name's Rachel Carter. This is the story of how I disappeared. That day had been like any other, or at least I told myself it was. I worked the closing shift at Harper's Market. I flipped the close sign with a practiced motion. The little jingle of the door's bell rang out into the cold night air. The parking lot was bathed in a tired orange glow from the streetlights. The bulbs flickered like they were trying to decide whether to give up completely. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint singing. Carolers, maybe. Their voices rose and fell. Instead of feeling festive, it sounded lonely, almost haunting. As I locked the store door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Victor. Again. His name lit up the screen like a bad omen. My stomach knotted. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Victor had a way of dragging me into his storms, even when I swore I'd stay clear of them. Instead, I pulled up a different number. Paul's. My thumb hovered for a second before I hit call. Yeah, he answered after a few rings. His voice was short, like he'd been expecting the call but hadn't wanted it. You still coming? I asked. I kept my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. 5 minutes, he said, already sounding impatient. Same spot? Same spot, I confirmed and hung up. Paul. He was another one of those complicated chapters in my life. The kind you don't really want to read aloud but also can't seem to tear out. He wasn't mine. Married. Older. A professional at making promises that melted like snow in the sun. But he'd been there when I had no one else. Somehow, that was enough. He helped me get an apartment when things with Victor had crumbled into something ugly. In return, I let him carve out pieces of me I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. Tonight, though, I wasn't thinking about all that. Tonight, I just needed a ride. I stepped under the lone streetlight in the parking lot. The cold seeped into my coat no matter how tightly I hugged it around myself. Snowflakes had begun to fall, soft and slow, drifting down like they weren't in any rush. For a second, I let myself get lost in the quiet, the kind that only exists when the world's asleep. Then I heard it, the crunch of footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw him. Victor. His broad frame stood out against the dim glow of the lights. His hands were shoved into his jacket pockets. "Rachel," he called. His voice cut through the stillness. "We need to talk." "Not tonight," I said, trying to sound firm, though my pulse quickened. I took a small step back, trying to keep some space between us. "You're going with him, aren't you?" he asked, his jaw tight, his tone a mixture of hurt and anger. "You think he cares about you? About Mia?" The mention of my daughter hit like a cold slap to the face. My chest tightened. My hands balled into fists inside my coat. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't bring her into this." Victor's eyes softened for a moment. The anger flickered into something like sadness. Then he stepped closer. His voice lowered. "Rachel, just let me drive you home. It's freezing out here. You don't have to do this." Before I could answer, the glare of headlights washed over us. Paul's car pulled up. The tires crunched against the thin layer of snow that had already started to coat the ground. Without a word, I turned and climbed into the car. The door shut with a thud that seemed to echo in the quiet lot. Victor didn't follow. He just stood there. His figure shrank in the rearview mirror as Paul pulled away. The drive was silent. Paul wasn't much for small talk. Tonight, I was grateful for that. He dropped me off a block from my apartment, as usual. I stepped out into the snow, watching his taillights fade into the distance. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than it should. I started walking. When I reached my building, I didn't go inside. I kept walking, past the dark windows of my apartment, past the corner store with its flickering open sign, past the old church with its crooked nativity scene glowing faintly in the snow. My boots crunched softly with each step. I told myself I was just clearing my head, but deep down I knew it wasn't that. I just didn't want to sit in that empty apartment, alone with my thoughts. That's when I noticed it. A car. It had been following me for a few blocks, staying far enough back that it might have been a coincidence. But when I crossed the street, it crossed too. When I stopped to tie my boot, it slowed. My chest tightened. I felt the cold prickle of fear crawl up my spine. I turned down an alley, hoping to shake it. The car rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley. Its headlights threw long, sharp shadows against the brick walls. My breath puffed out in quick, white clouds as I pressed myself against the wall, listening. "Rachel." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it froze me in place. I turned slowly. There he was. Not Victor, not Paul. Someone I hadn't seen in years, someone I thought I'd left behind forever. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. He smiled. There was no warmth in it. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. "It's not safe." Before I could answer, the world went dark. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the music. A warped version of Silent Night played faintly in the background. The notes were thin and tinny, like they were coming from an old radio. The air was damp and cold. The faint smell of mildew clung to everything. My wrists ached. The rope dug into my skin. The rough fibers burned every time I moved. I was in a basement, concrete walls, a dirt-streaked floor, a single, flickering bulb overhead. Panic surged. I bit it back. Screaming wouldn't help. No one would hear me down here. Instead, I focused on the rope, twisting my wrists against it until my skin felt raw. Finally, the knots loosened. I slipped free. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them. Each step was loud enough to make my heart race. The door at the top wasn't locked. When I pushed it open, I stepped into a strange, dimly lit room. Christmas lights hung haphazardly from the walls. Their colors cast eerie shadows. A crooked tree stood in the corner. Its ornaments were shattered and scattered on the floor like broken promises. I didn't have time to take it in. The crunch of tires outside snapped me back to reality. He was back. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything I could use. In the corner, leaning against the wall, was a rusted fireplace poker. I grabbed it. I gripped it tightly with trembling hands. My breath came in short bursts as I positioned myself near the door. The knob turned. The door creaked. I lunged. They never found Rachel Carter's body. At least that's what the papers said. What they did find were footprints in the snow, a broken rope, a bloodied fireplace poker left abandoned in the middle of a darkened room. Some say her ghost still wanders those empty streets on Christmas Eve, warning those who stray too far from the light. But those are just stories, aren't they? It wasn't snowing that Christmas Eve. That's the first thing I remember. How bare and bitter the night felt without snow. The sky was a deep, endless black, sharp and clear, with stars scattered like bits of shattered glass. Frost clung to the streets outside the hospital, shimmering under the streetlights. But there wasn't a single snowflake in sight. Maya, my sister, muttered something about it being a Christmas without magic. Her voice was tinged with disappointment. She'd always been the kind of person who thought Christmas should look like the front of a holiday card. The snow-covered trees, glowing windows, and the faint jingle of sleigh bells in the distance. But me? I couldn't have cared less about Christmas. Not this year. The hospital room was painfully sterile, like every other room on that floor. Too small, too bright, and too quiet, except for the monotonous beep of the machines hooked up to me and the relentless ticking of the wall clock. That clock drove me insane. Its sharp, rhythmic ticks weren't just a reminder of time passing. They felt like a countdown, a slow, deliberate march towards something I wasn't ready to face. Mitral valve disease. The words sounded clinical, detached. But the reality was anything but. My heart was failing. Each beat was a fragile thing, like glass threatening to shatter with the slightest wrong move. The doctors had explained everything in their calm, rehearsed tones. How I was on the transplant list, how the odds weren't great, and how there were too many names above mine. Months had passed since I was put on the list. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. I might not make it to the top. Christmas is for miracles, Maya said that night, her voice chipper as she plugged in a string of lights she'd brought from home. She draped them around the headboard of my hospital bed. The tiny bulbs cast a soft, warm glow against the stark white walls. You just have to believe, Jay. Believe hard enough and anything's possible. I forced a smile, more for her sake than mine. Maya needed hope, needed something to cling to, and I didn't have the heart to take that away from her. But deep down, I wasn't buying it. Miracles? They didn't exist. Not for people like me. That night, something happened. It's hard to explain even now. I wasn't asleep. I couldn't sleep no matter how much I wanted to. I was lying there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling paint. My mind was a tangled mess of thoughts when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, some trick of the dim light spilling in from the hallway. But then it moved. It started in the far corner of the room, a dark, shapeless blur. Slowly it took form, growing taller, stretching out into something that looked almost human. Almost. Its limbs were too long, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding instead of walking. And its face. It didn't have one. Not really. Where a face should have been. There was only swirling darkness, like looking into a bottomless void. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat tightened, my chest heaving as panic set in. I gripped the edge of the blanket, every muscle in my body frozen. "You want to live," it said. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't even really a voice. It was more like a vibration, deep and hollow, resonating somewhere in my chest. I didn't respond. I couldn't. But it didn't seem to need an answer. "There is a cost," it continued, stepping closer. "Do you accept?" I should have asked questions. I should have thought it through. But I didn't. I just nodded. Something primal, some desperate instinct took over. I wanted to live. That was all I knew. Its hand, or what I assumed was a hand, extended toward me. It didn't touch me, not directly, but I felt it. Heat exploded in my chest, sharp and searing, like a blade slicing through me. The pain was so overwhelming that the edges of my vision blurred. For a moment I thought I was dying. Then everything went black. When I woke up, the room was in chaos. Nurses and doctors surrounded my bed. Their voices overlapped in a frantic blur. Machines beeped wildly, alarms blaring. Maya was there, tears streaming down her face, her hand clutching mine so tightly it hurt. "Jay," she sobbed, "you're going to be okay. They found a donor. It's a miracle. A Christmas miracle." I blinked, trying to process her words. Found a donor? Just like that. My heart was still racing, pounding in my chest with a strength I hadn't felt in months. But something about it felt off. uneasy. Her words, a miracle, echoed in my mind, colliding with the memory of the shadowy figure. Its voice was still there, lingering in the back of my thoughts. There is a cost. The surgery happened early Christmas morning. By the time the anesthesia wore off, it was late afternoon. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the steady rhythm in my chest. A new heartbeat. A strong one. The pain was there, of course. But beneath it was something else, something I couldn't quite put into words. Maya was sitting by my bed, reading a worn paperback she'd probably grabbed from the hospital gift shop. She looked up when I stirred, her face lighting up with relief. "Hey," she said softly. "Welcome back." I nodded weakly, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I couldn't stop wondering about the heart now beating inside me. Who had it belonged to? What kind of life had they lived? I wanted to ask, but I didn't have the courage. Later, when Maya stepped out for coffee, I overheard two nurses talking just outside my door. "He was a prisoner," one of them said. "Executed last night. Can you imagine? His heart saved a life." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. A prisoner. Someone who'd killed, someone condemned. And now his heart was in my chest. That night, the dreams began. They weren't dreams, really. They were memories. Dark alleys, dimly lit rooms, blood splattered on walls, faces I didn't recognize twisted in terror. And always there was this overwhelming feeling of rage. I woke up in a cold sweat, my hands trembling. But the worst part? I felt something else. Hunger. A deep, gnawing craving for something I couldn't name. By the next night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The unease, the restless energy, the way my thoughts felt like they weren't entirely mine. Maya had gone home to get some sleep. The hospital was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I wandered the halls, hoping movement might help. That's when I saw him. He stood at the end of the corridor, half hidden in the shadows. His face was pale, his eyes burning with something that wasn't quite human. His prison uniform hung loosely on his frame, stained with something dark and wet. "You took it," he said, his voice low and rough, every word dripping with accusation. "You took my heart." I stumbled back, clutching my chest. "Who? What are you?" I managed to choke out. He stepped closer, and the smell of blood hit me. Metallic, sharp, overwhelming. His hands were slick with it, dripping onto the floor. "It's not yours," he said. "You're just borrowing it." I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just ran. When I reached my room, I locked the door, pressing my back against it as if that could keep him out. My heart, or his heart, hammered against my ribs. Each beat echoed like a warning. The lights flickered. The air turned cold. And then he was there, standing by the window, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "This doesn't end here," he said. "You owe me." The lights went out completely. For a moment there was only darkness, thick and suffocating. When they flickered back on, he was gone. But the blood, on my hands, my chest, the floor was still there. The nurses told me it was stress, that my mind was struggling to adjust. But I knew better. The dreams continued. With each one, I felt something inside me shift, like I was becoming someone else. By Christmas night, I understood. This heart wasn't just a second chance. It wasn't a miracle. It was a curse. I wasn't sure how long I could carry it before it consumed me entirely. The first thing I remember about that Christmas was the music. Tinny carols, barely clinging to life, crackled from an ancient radio propped up on a dusty crate. It had seen better days, and so had the song it was playing. Silent Night. Of all things, it drifted through the freezing air, a cheerful mockery of what was happening. The RV sat there like a beaten-down relic, parked on the edge of an abandoned lot where nothing grew and no one dared to linger. Its windows were fogged over, smeared with streaks of grime, and its once white exterior was now a patchwork of dirt and rust. Not a single string of lights, not a wreath, nothing festive about it, except for a half-dead tree visible through the windshield. It leaned awkwardly to one side, like it had given up on standing straight. The smell hit me before I even stepped inside. A gut-turning mix of gasoline, bleach, and something faintly metallic, like blood. It was a smell that stuck in your nose, made worse by the cold, damp air that clung to everything. I swallowed hard, trying not to let it show that it bothered me. By then, I'd been working undercover for months, living among criminals who made their money smuggling stolen military tech. I thought I'd gotten used to rough conditions. But that night was different. That night wasn't about keeping my cover. It wasn't even about the operation. It was about staying alive. Roach, the leader of the crew, had called us all together for what he called a Christmas celebration. The way he said it, with that twitchy grin of his, made my stomach knot. Nothing good ever came from one of Roach's get-togethers. He was pacing in the yard, his wiry frame almost disappearing in the shadows, shoving beers into our hands like it was some kind of party. His toast, though, gave away his real intention: to loyalty and family. The way he emphasized loyalty made it clear this wasn't going to be a merry holiday gathering. Then Salazar stepped forward, dragging a burlap sack behind him. I swear you could hear the tension in the air, like a string being pulled too tight. Salazar always had this way about him, calm, composed, but with a darkness behind his eyes that made your skin crawl. He tipped the sack over, and out spilled burner phones, wires, and a surveillance device. My stomach dropped. I recognized it immediately. It wasn't ours. It wasn't from the feds or any agency I was aware of. It was a plant, a trap. Salazar had set it up to flush out a rat. There's a rat among us. His voice was low and even, slicing through the cold night like a blade. Everyone froze. No one dared to move, not even to breathe. Then his gaze landed on me. It wasn't long, just a second or two, but it was enough. I knew right then that my time was up. They marched me into the RV, and if the outside looked bad, the inside was worse. The smell hit me again, stronger now, mixed with sweat and something stale, like old cigarettes and damp wood. Strings of Christmas lights hung limply from the ceiling, some blinking sporadically, others completely burnt out. They cast the room in this eerie red and green glow, like a bad horror movie trying too hard. There was tinsel, too, draped half-heartedly over the windows, but it only made the place feel more suffocating. In the corner, I spotted a bucket. I didn't want to know what it was for. Salazar shoved me into a metal chair bolted to the floor. The scrape of it against the linoleum was enough to make my teeth ache. On the table in front of me sat a car battery and a pair of jumper cables. Beside them was a knife. Its blade caught the weak light from the flickering bulbs. "Merry Christmas." His tone was light, almost cheerful. The radio in the corner had switched to Jingle Bells, the jaunty tune clashing horribly with the tension in the room. He started slow, asking questions about shipments, routes, names. I kept my answers vague, careful not to give too much away. I could feel his eyes on me the entire time, watching every twitch, every breath. He didn't interrupt, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence between questions was enough to make my skin crawl. Then he pulled out a photo. My breath caught in my throat. It was Maria, my sister. She was standing outside her apartment, a coffee cup in her hand, her face soft and relaxed, completely unaware that someone had been watching her. My chest tightened so hard it felt like I'd been punched. She had nothing to do with this. She didn't even know what I was doing. Salazar held up the photo like it was a trophy. Pretty girl. His voice dropped into something colder, more deliberate. Wouldn't want anything to happen to her. I gripped the chair so hard my fingers started to go numb. My brain was spinning, racing through options that didn't exist. I haven't seen her in years. I forced my voice to waver just enough. "We don't talk. She hates me. You'd be wasting your time." Salazar didn't flinch. He picked up the jumper cables, connecting them to the battery with a sharp, deliberate motion. The faint crackle of electricity filled the room. Last chance. His voice was almost bored. "Tell me the truth, or I'll bring her here, and you can watch what happens next." I couldn't crack. If I confessed, they'd kill me and go after her anyway. If I held out, there was still a chance. Slim, but there. So I lied. I poured every ounce of desperation into my voice, begging him to tell me where she was, pretending I'd been searching for her for years. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven, and I prayed it was enough to sell the story. Salazar watched me for what felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he leaned back and shrugged. "Maybe you're telling the truth." His tone was almost lazy. "But if you're not, Eddie, well, let's just hope Santa's in a forgiving mood this year." They let me go after that, shoving me back into the freezing night. The others were still outside, pretending to drink and laugh, but I could feel their eyes on me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely light the cigarette I fumbled out of my pocket. I took a drag. It didn't help. Nothing did. That night I called my handler and told him Maria needed to be moved. Now. No arguments. By morning she was on a plane to a safe house in another state. She screamed at me over the phone, furious about being uprooted on Christmas. But I didn't care. She was alive. That was all that mattered. The operation dragged on for weeks after that, but that night never left me. The carols, The flickering lights, the way Salazar smiled when he showed me her photo. It all stayed with me, burned into my mind like a scar. When the bus finally happened, Roach and most of the crew went down. But Salazar? He vanished. Slipped away like smoke, leaving nothing behind. Later, I found out the truth. He'd been a mole, working for the feds all along. He'd played us all, using me as just another pawn in his game. To this day, I can't hear A Christmas Carol without feeling that knot in my stomach tighten. Most people remember Christmas for warmth, for joy, for family. I remember it for the smell of bleach, the glint of a knife, and the hollow echo of Silent Night, playing in a room built for pain. You know, life has a funny way of taking you places you never expected. If you told me back in college that I'd end up running a little antique shop in the middle of nowhere, I would have laughed in your face. But sometimes the dreams you have get derailed by reality. For me, that reality was endless job applications, rejection after rejection. I stopped aiming so high. I just needed something to pay the bills. That's how I ended up in this shop. A cramped little place sandwiched between a laundromat and a diner that hadn't opened its doors in years. The shop had this peculiar smell, like old books and furniture polish, with a faint hint of damp wood that seemed to cling to everything. It wasn't much, but it kept the lights on. I told myself it was just temporary. I'd figure out something better. Then weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Before I knew it, the shop wasn't just my job, it was my whole world. By the time that particular Christmas rolled around, I was running the place. My boss had retired earlier in the year, leaving me in charge. I had a couple of part-timers to help out, and one of them was Ellie. I'll never forget Ellie. She was hired just before the holiday season, a burst of energy wrapped in a green scarf and a leather jacket. She had one of those personalities that made people gravitate toward her. Customers loved her, especially the older ones. She had this way of talking to people that felt genuine, like she was really interested in what they had to say. But Ellie wasn't just cheerful. There was something else about her too, something harder to define. She always seemed alert, like she was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. She was new, after all. But over time, I started to notice things. The way her smile would falter when she thought no one was looking. The way she'd glance toward the door every time the bell jingled. It didn't take long to figure out why. His name was Dean, and he was Ellie's boyfriend. Or at least that's what she called him. Dean was the kind of guy you couldn't ignore, even if you wanted to. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with this quiet, simmering anger that made the air feel heavier whenever he was around. He didn't come in often, but when he did, it was impossible to miss. Dean would linger near Ellie, always watching her, like a hawk circling its prey. If she so much as exchanged a friendly word with a male customer, his jaw would tighten, and his fist would curl up like he was ready to throw a punch. At first, Ellie played it off, making little jokes to diffuse the tension. But as the weeks went by, I started to see the cracks in her armor. She began slipping away during her breaks, heading down to the basement instead of staying in the front room. It was like she was trying to avoid him without making it obvious. Now, let me tell you about the basement. It wasn't anything special. Just a cold, dimly lit storage area crammed with old furniture, dusty boxes, and antiques we hadn't gotten around to pricing yet. The air down there always felt damp, and the single overhead bulb flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or off. But for Ellie, it seemed like a sanctuary. I'd find her down there sometimes, curled up in an old armchair with her phone, scrolling through memes or humming quietly to herself. She never said it outright, but I could tell she liked the solitude. Then came Christmas Eve. I don't know what it is about the holidays, but they seem to bring out the last-minute shoppers in droves. The shop was packed that day, busier than it had been in months. People were rifling through shelves, hunting for the perfect gift. Or, let's be honest, whatever was left. Ellie was in her element, juggling customers with that bright smile of hers, her green scarf trailing behind her as she darted around the shop. Dean wasn't there that day, and I could see the relief on Ellie's face. For the first time in weeks, she looked like she could breathe again. Around mid-afternoon, she told me she was taking her break and headed down to the basement. I didn't think much of it. She always came back, but this time she didn't. At first, I didn't even notice. The shop was a madhouse, and Ellie wasn't the type to slack off. It wasn't until things started to quiet down that I realized she'd been gone a lot longer than usual. A knot of unease began forming in my stomach as I headed toward the basement stairs. Ellie, I called out as I made my way down the creaky wooden steps. My voice echoed in the stillness, but there was no reply. The air down there was colder than usual. Sharp, biting, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. The basement was empty. Well, not completely empty. Her green scarf was there, draped neatly over the armchair. It was such a small thing, but it sent a chill down my spine. Ellie never went anywhere without that scarf. The steel door in the corner of the basement was still bolted shut from the inside, so she couldn't have left that way. I told myself she must have slipped out the front without telling me. Maybe she'd gotten overwhelmed and decided to call it a day. But the stillness of the basement stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. That night, as I locked up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ellie didn't answer her phone, and by the next morning, Christmas Day, the police were at my door. Her parents had reported her missing. She hadn't come home, and her phone was off. I told the officers everything I knew, which wasn't much. I mentioned Dean, his possessive behavior, the way Ellie had started hiding in the basement. They listened, taking notes, their expressions unreadable. When they left, I couldn't stop replaying our last conversation in my head. Had I missed something? Should I have done more? A few days later, my worst fears were confirmed. The janitor found her. The smell was the first clue. Faint at first, like something rotting in the walls. When they moved the boxes stacked in the corner, they found the crawl space. And inside it, they found Ellie. She was curled up, her body pale and bruised, her green scarf knotted tightly around her neck. The shop turned into a crime scene overnight. Police swarmed the place, combing through every inch of the basement. All signs pointed to Dean. He'd vanished the same night Ellie did, and his record didn't do him any favors. Domestic disturbances, an old assault charge. It all seemed to add up. But there's one thing I've never told anyone, and that scarf. The one they found around her neck. It wasn't there when I checked the basement on Christmas Eve. I remember it clearly, draped neatly over the armchair. Someone put it there later. Someone came back. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't Dean. Maybe it was someone else, someone Ellie trusted, someone she let her guard down around. Whoever it was, they're still out there, watching, waiting. Every Christmas since, I closed the shop early. The basement stays locked, untouched, and I don't tell the new employees about Ellie or the scarf. But every year, like clockwork, she finds her way into my dreams. A flash of green, a soft laugh, and the icy grip of fear that wakes me before dawn. Ellie's gone, but her memory lingers, along with the questions that will never have answers. And no matter how much time passes, I know one thing for sure. I'll never feel safe again. That Christmas Eve started like any other, or at least that's what I thought at the time. Our little town, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, was glowing with festive cheer. String lights crisscrossed the main street, reflecting off fresh snow that blanketed everything like some Hallmark postcard come to life. The air had that sharp, biting cold that makes your breath swirl in front of you. It was mixed with the faint scent of pine and wood smoke curling up from chimneys. It was beautiful and peaceful. Exactly the kind of night where you'd expect everything to be calm and ordinary. But nothing about that night turned out ordinary. I was staying in my grandmother's house, the one I'd grown up visiting every summer and holiday. You'd love this place if you saw it. Creaky wooden floors, big bay windows that let in the kind of light that makes everything feel nostalgic, and walls that seem to hum with the echoes of conversations from decades past. It had been passed down through generations, and even though it was a bit worn around the edges, it still felt like home. Except that night, home felt off. This year, everyone else in the family had scattered. Work commitments, flu season, you name it. So it was just me, holding down the fort and trying to keep up the traditions. I told myself it'd be nice, quiet, a chance to soak up the old memories without the chaos of a full house. But by the time the grandfather clock chimed 9, I was already starting to feel the weight of the silence. I'd curled up in the armchair by the fire, hot chocolate in hand, flipping through one of Grandma's old photo albums. The kind that smells faintly of dust and glue, with pages so delicate you're afraid they'll tear. Every photo felt like opening a little time capsule. There was Grandma as a young woman, my dad as a grinning teenager, and me wide-eyed, with a ball the size of my head strapped to my hair. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt like something was missing. The tree was up, the fire was roaring, and the house was warm, but the emptiness clung to the corners like a shadow that refused to leave. And then I heard it, in a knock. It wasn't loud, more like the sound of someone tapping their knuckles against the front door. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Who would be out here? The house sat at the end of a long, winding lane, surrounded by nothing but fields and trees. It wasn't exactly the kind of place you just stumble upon. But then it came again, slightly louder, more deliberate. I set down the album and stood up. The creak of the floorboards under my weight sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor, though we didn't have many nearby, or a delivery person. On Christmas Eve, I told myself it was nothing to be worried about as I made my way to the door, though my heart had already started beating faster. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a tall shape standing on the porch, perfectly still. The porch light cast a halo around them, but the details were blurred by the frost and the way my breath fogged up the glass as I leaned closer. "Hello," I called out, cracking the door open just enough to let in the icy bite of the wind. The figure didn't move. He, or at least I think it was a he, was wrapped in a long dark coat, the hood pulled up so that his face was nothing but shadow. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt them, cold and heavy, like they were drilling straight through me. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. "You've forgotten," he said, his voice low and rough, like a whisper dragged over gravel. The words stopped me cold. "Forgotten? Forgotten what?" Before I could ask, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow like he'd never been there at all. I slammed the door and locked it, my heart pounding. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to convince myself it was nothing. A prank, a drunk guy, maybe some strange caroler with a flair for the dramatic. But his words clung to me like frostbite. "You've forgotten." Back in the living room, I threw another log on the fire and curled up in my chair, telling myself to shake it off, but I couldn't. Every flicker of the flame seemed to cast shadows that stretched too far, too deep. The photos in the album blurred together as my thoughts spiraled. Who was he? How did he know me? Or was it just some eerie coincidence? By the time the clock struck 11, the fire had burned low, and the chill in the air was creeping back in. I decided to head to bed, thinking maybe sleep would clear my head. But just as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it came from the back of the house. The kitchen door. I froze, gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until my chest started to hurt. Who the hell would go around to the back door? And then, before I could move, I heard it. The door creaked open. Footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate, and far too calm for someone who'd just broken into a house. They weren't hurried, like someone sneaking. No, they were confident, purposeful, crunching slightly, as if bits of snow still clung to the soles of their boots. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the steady rhythm of footsteps, growing louder, closer. I backed into my room, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the lock to catch. My phone was on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, only to find the screen dead. It had been charged earlier. I was sure of it. The doorknob rattled. "Have you remembered yet?" The voice, calm and gravelly, was now just on the other side of the door. I pressed myself against the bed frame, every nerve in my body screaming for an answer I didn't have. Remembered what? And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The rattling, the breathing, the presence, gone. And minutes passed, maybe hours. I couldn't bring myself to move until the first weak light of dawn began creeping through the window. My legs ached as I finally stood and crept toward the door. I unlocked it, my fingers trembling, and peered into the hallway. He was gone. But at the top of the stairs, where the snow from his boots had melted into dark, wet patches, there was a single note. I picked it up, my heart pounding. The words scrawled across it in jagged, angry letters were simple but chilling. "You will remember." I don't remember how I got through the rest of that day. I stayed awake until the fire was roaring again, every light in the house blazing. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting, and every Christmas since I've felt him. A shadow flickering at the edge of my vision, a whisper carried on the wind. I still don't know what I've forgotten, but deep down I know one thing for sure. He's waiting, and when the time comes, he'll make sure I remember. Don't forget to check out these videos. Thanks for watching.